within digital, everything's a click away, right? And it becomes very noticeable to the consumer because there's no other media out there that brings everything together and brings your the life cycle movement from awareness, consideration, purchase. It's a seamless movement. It's all online. It's all in clicks, and so the consumer is moving continuously through this evolution. Versus in a lot of other media, you bounce between the media. So you see something on TV, and then it's it's separated from maybe you going over to the website, or you saw something in the newspaper, but that's separate from the other media, or you went to an event. Whereas within digital, it's a much more fluid experience, and so I think when you're inconsistent in that experience, it's much more noticeable to the consumer. I think the other thing is that from my background, I've done e-commerce, I've done self-service, I've run online advertising, I've run paid search, I've done organic search and social media. So when it comes to digital, I've actually run all aspects of it, and I think it gives you a different point of view because you actually are aware of how each one of these components can actually come together. Whereas if you've only done e-commerce, then your level of understanding of e-service, for example, is not going to enable you to see opportunities in your e-commerce design that could actually help you in your e-service design later down the road, right? So we end up creating calls into care in part because of our e-commerce experience. And someone that's pure e-commerce isn't going to see that. I think that our retail stores have been successful because our retail reps don't try to push a particular phone that might be one that we're trying to sell onto a consumer. They right fit the consumer. They make sure that their recommendation is what the consumer needs. In a lot of ways, we need to do that on the web. We just do it virtually. So we have virtual sales reps. And the approach that we take in selling in our offline, we need to take that same approach online. You just have to do it through content. Versus, obviously training and an employee. But the principle, I think, is the same. I think that brand is dialogue, and I think that it's a conversation. And I think that it's been mentioned earlier in the presentations, and I believe this firmly that your consumer owns your brand, and they actually are your branding agency, not you, and not the agency you pay a lot for your brand. So our customers and prospects are having more ongoing dialogue on our brand and our products and services than we are, right? And so we actually have a ton of brand advocates out there who are actually talking and representing our brand on a daily basis in the online world. And so I think our job as marketers and curators is how do we bring those people together? So how do I actually bring those advocates who really believe in our brand, who have an air of authentication that I don't have per se as the branding? How do I bring those together to really give that voice of the brand? And I think that your brand, if it's an emotional brand, starts coming to life because a consumer will tell a real life story. You can't, no matter how well you pick your models for your photo shoot, you never can capture that energy of a real human talking about something that was meaningful for them. And so I think that I'm a big advocate of using user-generated content and using the consumer, because I think in the end, if it's an emotional brand, they will actually bring that brand forward in ways that are meaningful for them. Other consumers will be able to relate to that. So I think that they're probably our biggest branding agency. I think that the nature in a certain way with friends and so forth, in the end, is you are forming a community. And I think people like to share their opinions, thoughts, and ideas. We're very much a share society now. And they like to, there's this notion within sharing that you're actually helping. So a lot of people out there like to just help other people, and they take a lot of pride in helping other people. And so, how do I ensure that as they're helping those people, they're helping them with the correct information, right? So how do I ensure that those people I recognize as being advocates of mine, and how do I ensure that the product and service information that they have is the most effective, and how do I ensure that they know that we're listening, so when they're telling us stuff, we actually have a feedback loop to bring it back in. so that it's not just a conversation that's occurring without us. We have to be part of that conversation, but they have to know that we are actively listening, and that we are interested in hearing what they say, and that we're interested in actually taking action on it. Well, I think it started kind of in the 1.0. It was really just a pure publishing model, right? It was a broadcast out in a very controlled manner. And I think you started getting into 1.2 or 1.5 and kind of heading into 2, where the dialogue started to occur. But everything was still kind of on a branded site and a branded property. So everything was still happening for the most part on that main site. Then you started seeing companies wanting to optimize in some ways for organic search. In some ways it's just easier to build a separate site. So they started doing these microsites, and they started doing little niche sites. And so then you started seeing a fragmentation. It was no longer just the primary site. Then you started seeing them embrace official social sites. So now you've got yet another collection of sites out there. And so each one of those sites is building your brand and representing your product. But in most cases and in most companies, they're not looking at it holistically. But the consumer is moving between all of them, and it's the same brand and it's the same product for all of those. So I think that's kind of where we're at now, is I think a lot of companies are starting to recognize that they have to connect those dots a little bit more. But I think that in my mind, I think it ultimately just comes down to it's digital content that's served up across a multiple digital screen environment. And so I think this concept of web, in some ways will become antiquated, because I think web is kind of the transport, if you will, but it's really the experiences you have on those screens. And I think you start seeing stuff that Xbox is doing with some of their products and so forth. You're seeing a lot of integration in between gaming and handset consoles and web, and your TV is all digital now, right? And you're starting to see digital interaction with TV. And so this notion of web as a channel, to me, I think evolves to web as an enabling technology to bring content and interactions and connections to multiple screens. And I think the consumer will move between all those screens, and I think they'll literally, in that kind of swipe kind of mentality, they want to just be able to swipe through those digital screens at the content. And I think that what you'll see is the need to have a curator and have someone who is actually helping hone that content down and bring it together in a meaningful way for the consumer, but in a way that doesn't feel as though it's biased, so that it's objective, so that they feel as though you really are their advocate. So I kind of think that that's where it's going to head, but we got to change kind of how our filter is. So if we view the web as a web channel, if we view the stuff we're doing as pure media, I think it makes it harder to get to that evolved space.